The strength hidden in silence. Most people grow up believing that strength must always be visible. It must be announced, defended, and constantly demonstrated in front of others. From an early age, individuals are subtly conditioned to prove themselves, to show confidence, to defend their opinions quickly, and to react immediately when challenged. The problem with this pattern is that it creates a fragile version of strength. A person who constantly feels the need to display power is often still dependent on the reactions of others to confirm that power exists. The pressure to appear strong in public environments creates a quiet form of emotional vulnerability. When someone is focused on being seen as capable, intelligent, or dominant, their attention shifts outward. Their thoughts begin orbiting around the perceptions of others rather than around their own internal clarity. They begin adjusting their tone, their decisions, and even their reactions based on what will protect their image. This constant adjustment slowly erodes the kind of stability that real strength requires. What most people overlook is that genuine strength often develops in the opposite direction. It grows quietly, away from the need to perform. The individuals who possess the most stable sense of control rarely feel the urge to prove it. Instead of reacting to every disagreement or challenge, they observe. Instead of rushing to assert their position, they pause long enough to understand the situation more clearly. Silence becomes a tool of perception rather than a sign of hesitation. This quiet approach creates an unusual psychological advantage. When a person stops reacting to every stimulus around them, they begin to see patterns that others miss. In social environments, many individuals reveal their insecurities through constant reaction. They defend themselves too quickly, speak too much, or attempt to dominate conversations to maintain their image. But the quiet observer learns more simply by watching these reactions unfold. Silence also changes the relationship a person has with their own emotions. When reactions are slowed down, emotions lose their ability to control immediate behavior. Instead of responding impulsively to tension, criticism, or disagreement, the individual begins to create a small but powerful space between stimulus and response. In that space, something important happens. Thought replaces instinct. Awareness replaces impulse. What once felt like pressure becomes something that can be examined calmly. Over time, this discipline transforms the way a person moves through the world. Situations that once triggered quick reactions begin to feel less urgent. Other people's opinions become information rather than commands. Social pressure loses its power because the individual is no longer measuring themselves against external approval. Their sense of stability begins to come from internal standards rather than public recognition. Quiet strength does not announce itself. It does not compete for attention or demand validation. It reveals itself in the ability to remain calm when others become reactive, in the ability to observe when others rush to speak, and in the ability to think clearly when the environment becomes emotionally charged. The person who develops this discipline becomes difficult to provoke, difficult to manipulate, and increasingly difficult to influence through pressure alone. What initially appears as silence gradually becomes something more powerful. It becomes composure. It becomes restraint. And eventually it becomes a form of authority that does not rely on noise, performance, or constant demonstration. The advantage of being underestimated: most people spend a large portion of their lives trying to be recognized. They want their intelligence acknowledged, their competence noticed, and their strength confirmed by others. This impulse often appears harmless, even natural, yet the pursuit of recognition quietly changes the way people behave. When someone is focused on being perceived as capable, they begin revealing far more about themselves than they realize. Their intentions, their insecurities, and their ambitions slowly become visible through the effort to impress. The paradox is that the moment a person begins trying to prove their value, they often lose a certain strategic advantage. They become predictable. Their actions begin to revolve around demonstrating competence rather than understanding situations clearly. In social and professional environments, individuals who are eager to show their ability often speak too soon, react too quickly, and expose their thinking before they fully understand the environment around them. What most people fail to notice is that quiet individuals operate very differently. When someone is not preoccupied with proving their intelligence or dominance, they move through situations with far greater awareness. They listen longer. They observe subtle behaviors. They notice how people react under pressure, how opinions shift when authority enters the room, and how individuals reveal their priorities through small emotional reactions. Being underestimated creates a quiet advantage because expectations become lower. When others assume someone is less significant, they often become careless in their presence. They speak more freely, reveal their plans more openly, and expose emotional vulnerabilities they would normally conceal around someone they perceive as powerful. The underestimated observer gathers information simply by remaining calm and attentive. This dynamic appears frequently in human behavior. In environments where competition and recognition are highly valued, individuals often compete for visibility. They interrupt each other, assert opinions quickly, and attempt to establish dominance in conversations. Yet the individual who remains quiet during these moments often sees the entire structure of the interaction more clearly. They recognize who is insecure, who seeks validation, and who reacts emotionally when challenged. The advantage of being underestimated is not about deception or manipulation. It emerges naturally when a person becomes comfortable with not constantly defending their image. When someone no longer feels the urge to correct every misunderstanding or prove their capability at every opportunity, they gain something far more valuable than recognition. They gain perspective. Perspective allows a person to understand the environment before acting within it. Instead of reacting impulsively to every moment of tension or competition, they begin choosing their actions more deliberately. They understand when silence is more valuable than explanation, and when patience reveals more information than confrontation. Over time, this mindset shifts the way a person approaches influence and authority. Rather than seeking attention, they develop the discipline to wait. They observe the direction of situations before committing their energy. They become selective with their words and measured with their responses. In a world where many individuals compete to be noticed, the person who remains composed and observant often becomes the one who understands the environment most clearly. What others interpret as quietness or lack of ambition is often a deeper form of awareness, and this awareness slowly becomes a foundation for a much more stable and controlled form of power. The discipline of emotional distance, one of the quiet battles most people face each day, is the struggle between emotion and control. Situations unfold quickly: a criticism, a disagreement, an unexpected challenge, and the immediate instinct is to react. The reaction feels natural because emotions demand expression. Anger pushes outward, frustration seeks release, and anxiety urges the mind to respond quickly before thinking has had time to fully engage. For many people, this rapid cycle of stimulus and reaction becomes automatic. Words are spoken in moments of tension that later feel unnecessary. Decisions are made while emotions are still unsettled. Conflicts escalate simply because neither side pauses long enough to examine what is actually happening beneath the surface. Over time, this habit of immediate reaction creates instability. A person begins to feel controlled by circumstances rather than capable of navigating them with clarity. The discipline of emotional distance begins with a simple but powerful shift: the willingness to pause. Instead of responding instantly to emotional discomfort, the individual learns to create a small space between what they feel and how they act. At first, this pause may feel unnatural. In a world that encourages quick responses and visible reactions, restraint can appear like hesitation. But in reality, this pause becomes one of the most powerful tools a person can develop. When someone pauses before reacting, emotions begin to lose their immediate authority over behavior. The mind regains its ability to observe rather than simply respond. Instead of becoming consumed by the emotional intensity of a situation, the individual begins to see the structure of the interaction more clearly. They notice tone, patterns, and intentions that would normally be hidden by the noise of immediate reaction. This distance from emotion does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending they do not exist. Rather, it means allowing emotions to settle before they are allowed to guide decisions. Anger may still appear, but it is examined before it becomes action. Frustration may still arise, but it no longer dictates the direction of the conversation. The individual learns to treat emotions as signals rather than commands. With time, this practice begins to reshape the way a person experiences tension. Situations that once felt overwhelming begin to feel manageable. The mind becomes less reactive and more analytical. Instead of interpreting every disagreement as a threat, the individual begins to see it as information. Instead of feeling compelled to defend themselves immediately, they allow the moment to unfold long enough to understand it fully. This emotional distance also changes the way other people interact with them. Many conflicts escalate because individuals mirror each other's emotional reactions. When one person raises their voice, the other responds with equal intensity. When frustration appears, it spreads quickly through the interaction. But when someone maintains composure in the middle of tension, the emotional rhythm of the situation changes. The escalation loses momentum. Over time, this discipline creates a deeper form of stability. The individual becomes harder to provoke, not because they lack emotion, but because they have learned to manage it with awareness. They begin responding with intention rather than impulse. Their words become fewer but more precise. Their decisions become slower but more deliberate. What once felt like emotional pressure gradually transforms into something else entirely. The individual discovers that control does not come from dominating situations or overpowering others. It emerges from the ability to remain steady when the environment becomes unstable. And in that steadiness, a different kind of strength begins to appear. The quiet authority that emerges over time. There comes a point in personal development when something subtle begins to change in the way a person carries themselves through the world. It does not arrive suddenly, and it rarely appears dramatic from the outside. Instead, it develops slowly through countless moments of restraint, observation, and emotional discipline. Situations that once demanded reaction now receive calm attention. Pressures that once provoked anxiety begin to feel manageable. Without realizing it at first, the individual begins moving differently through social environments. Much of this transformation begins with detachment from the need to constantly prove oneself. Earlier in life, many people feel compelled to defend their ideas, to correct misunderstandings, or to demonstrate their competence whenever they are challenged. This impulse is deeply connected to the desire for recognition and approval. When someone believes their value depends on how others perceive them, every interaction becomes a kind of performance. They feel responsible for maintaining an image. But when that need slowly fades, something unexpected happens. Energy that was once spent protecting reputation becomes available for something far more useful: awareness. Instead of focusing on how they appear, the individual begins paying attention to how situations actually unfold. Conversations reveal more than just words. Tone, hesitation, and emotional reactions begin to carry meaning. The person who is no longer preoccupied with validation becomes capable of observing the deeper patterns within human behavior. This quiet observation changes the way influence works. Many people attempt to gain authority through visible displays of strength. They assert themselves loudly, speak with certainty even when uncertain, and try to dominate discussions in order to appear powerful. While this approach may attract attention, it often lacks stability. Authority that relies on constant assertion must be maintained through continuous effort. Quiet authority operates differently. When a person consistently demonstrates composure, emotional control, and careful thinking, others begin to notice without being told. Their calm presence in difficult situations becomes a signal that they are not easily overwhelmed. Their measured responses suggest that they have considered more than what is immediately visible. Gradually, people begin to treat their words differently. This change happens almost invisibly. In tense environments, others start looking toward the composed individual before making decisions. During disagreements, their perspective carries more weight simply because it appears grounded rather than reactive. Even silence becomes meaningful. When someone who rarely speaks finally does, others instinctively pay attention. What creates this effect is not status or authority granted by position. It is the consistent demonstration of internal control. Over time, people recognize that the individual is not easily manipulated by pressure, emotion, or social expectations. Their stability becomes something others unconsciously rely on. This is the moment when quiet strength becomes visible, not as dominance, but as presence. The individual no longer feels the need to compete for attention or prove their intelligence in every conversation. Their confidence becomes quieter, less dependent on recognition. They move through situations with a steady sense of direction because their decisions are guided internally, rather than by the reactions of those around them. Eventually, a realization emerges from this process. The strength that once seemed hidden or unnoticed has been developing continuously beneath the surface. It was never dependent on applause, approval, or immediate recognition. It grew through patience, discipline, and the willingness to remain composed while others reacted impulsively. And over time, the person who follows this quiet path begins to understand something that many people overlook throughout their lives. The most stable form of power is the one that does not need to announce itself.